Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. The night is a temple, and you are safe within it. You've done enough today, thought enough, tried enough. Now it's time to be enough, just as you are. Tonight's stories were never meant for entertainment. They were shared in moments like this, between firelight and silence, between breath and insight. They are simple, ancient, and powerful in their simplicity. Before we begin, I invite you to pause. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you now? When we share these quiet details, we weave a larger circle, one held together not by urgency, but by rest. The stories you'll hear don't require belief. They ask only for presence. Let them settle into you like snow falling on still water. No need to interpret, no need to analyze. Just allow them to be and to become something in you. Inhale gently now. Exhale fully. Let the door of the mind fall open, and into that open space, the first story will now enter. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountain speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool." Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, But that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him. How a harsh joke left someone smaller. How a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away." Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it. But it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again. A house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here, just tea and a place to rest." The next morning the traveller left, but soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too, showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why'd you let them all in, even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while. It may lie on the couch for days. But eventually, it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came. The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting, and he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs, but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am." You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors. And you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, "What do you need? You're welcome here. For now." Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, "I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings. 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, "Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice?" And in his mind, a voice replied, "Whatever brings benefit, I do it." The monk frowned. "But how do I know what will help?" The voice was soft. "When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service." This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it, even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, "do it completely." In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough, where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish, it is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down and vow again, because the path is long, but every step walked in service. Becomes joy. It moved like time dash, patient, steady, clear. She had come to the water for answers, not about rituals, not about chanting, but about something deeper. Who am I? She had read sutras, memorized verses, and bowed each morning, but still, a knot remained in her chest. The old teacher, sensing her restlessness, came to sit beside her. They watched the water in silence for a while. Then he pointed to a single droplet clinging to a leaf above the current. It trembled. Round, whole, complete. "Is that a drop of water?" the master asked. She nodded. "Yes," he smiled. Then a breeze blew. The droplet fell and joined the river below. The master turned again. "Now tell me, where is the drop?" This is the story of non-self, of how the self we cling to is like a drop, never separate, never alone. Commentary. We walk through life asking, who am I? What is me? Where do I go when I die? But these questions are like trying to bottle the river. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is not fixed. No eternal soul, no unchanging core, only process, only flow, body, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These 5 aggregates arise and pass like waves. There is no boat, only current. The novice sat with this for many days. She stared at her reflection in the water, noticing how it changed when the wind blew, how it vanished when a stone was thrown, how it returned when the ripples faded. Was the reflection real? Yes. Was it solid? So too with the self. We exist, but not as a thing, as a movement, a flame, not a statue, a song, not a stone. One night, the novice had a dream. She stood before a vast river. She cupped water in her hands, holding it close, but it began to spill, to slip between her fingers, to return to the source. In the dream, she let it go and wept, not from sadness, but relief, because in letting go of the drop, she felt the whole river. When she woke, she wrote a single line in her journal. "I am not a drop in the river, I am the river in a drop." This is the heart of rebirth too, not the soul traveling from body to body, but conditions unfolding, like water taking many forms, cloud, rain, stream, mist, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are this moment, arising from countless causes and dissolving into new ones. When the master was old and dying, the novice, now a teacher, sat by his side. She asked him if he was afraid. He smiled faintly and said, "A drop returns to the river. How can it fear?" Then he closed his eyes and was gone. But the river kept flowing. So the next time you feel small or lost or alone, remember the drop and the river it was never truly apart from. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. There was once a kingdom where wisdom was prized like gold. Rulers held council with monks. Children learn not only how to count, but how to think. And among its most respected voices was a wandering teacher known simply as the Buddha. He did not wear jewels, he did not shout. But when he spoke, even the birds seemed to pause. And one day, in the town square of a village nestled near the banks of the Ganges, he told a story. Not to entertain, but to reveal. The dispute began with laughter, then sharp words. A group of scholars, each confident in his own tradition, had come to debate. Some were Brahmins, others were ascetics. A few belonged to newer sects, filled with fiery conviction and scrolls still smelling of fresh ink. They spoke of truth, of soul, of self, of afterlife, of permanence, of nothingness. Each man insisted his view was the whole, complete, correct. The others, misguided, foolish, dangerous. They argued beneath a fig tree, loud enough that passers-by turned to look. A merchant chuckled, a potter shook his head, a child pointed and whispered, "They sound like crows fighting over the same grain." When the Buddha arrived, he did not interrupt. He simply sat and waited until their voices began to falter, some from exhaustion, some from shame. And into that space, he placed his voice like a drop of water on a still pond. "There was once a king," the Buddha began, "who summoned 6 men born blind since birth." The scholars fell quiet. The king told them, "I will allow you to encounter something magnificent. Tell me what it is." The blind men were curious, eager. They were led one by one to a massive animal they had never known, a mighty elephant. Each man was guided to touch a different part. The first reached out and felt the flank. He pressed his palms against its broad, warm side and declared, "Ah, an elephant is like a wall, wide and unmoving." The second grasped the tusk, smooth and curved like polished stone. "No, no," he said. "An elephant is like a spear, sharp and strong." The third took hold of the trunk, which coiled and shifted in his arms. "You're both wrong. It is like a snake, alive, twisting, breathing." The fourth felt the knee, round and solid. "Clearly, it is like a tree trunk," he announced, "thick and rooted." The fifth wrapped his hands around the ear, which flapped gently like a fan. "You are mistaken. An elephant is a large fan, waving back and forth." The last man touched the tail, thin and rope-like. "No, no, it's a rope. A coarse, swaying rope." When they were brought back together, the king asked, "Well, what is an elephant?" And the shouting began. Each man insisted he was right. Each accused the others of ignorance. Each swore he had touched the truth with his own hands. And in a way, they had. The Buddha paused. The scholars sat frozen, the parable hanging in the air like incense smoke. Each man, he said, encountered only a part. Each was sincere, each described what he felt, and yet none saw the whole. He looked at each scholar now, gently, without judgment. "So it is with many truths. You may touch a piece and call it the whole, but when clinging to fragments, conflict follows." One of the younger scholars frowned. "But teacher," he said slowly, "does that mean there is no truth?" The Buddha smiled, not to mock, but to soften. "Number. It means that truth is vast, and the mind must be vast to hold it. One who sees the trunk and believes it is a snake is not lying, but he is also not seeing clearly. Another monk, one who had remained quiet through the debate, bowed. And what, Blessed One, is the way to see the whole? The Buddha turned his palm upward, a gesture of openness. Humility, listening, letting go of the need to be right. When you stop clinging to your peace, you make space for someone else's. And in that space, something greater may arise. The fig tree rustled gently above them. A breeze passed through the square. The tension had broken. One of the elders leaned forward. His voice was softer now. I have spent my life defending what I thought was the whole elephant, but now I wonder if I have only touched the tail. The Buddha nodded. Then you are further along the path than many who still cling to the tusk. That night, as lamps flickered in the homes of the village, the story traveled from mouth to mouth. Children reenacted the blind men, bumping into trees and miming trunks and tails. Elders sat in circles, wondering what part they had touched in their own lives, what truths they had guarded too tightly. And in one small home, a young girl asked her grandmother, "What does the whole elephant look like?" The old woman smiled. "We may never know for sure," she said. "But if we all share what we felt, maybe we can come closer." And so, the parable of the blind men and the elephant was passed on, not as a warning against belief, but as an invitation to perspective, to listen, to learn, to let go of the walls we build around our understanding. Centuries later, the story would still be told, in temples, in schools, in circles of debate and doubt. And always, it would whisper the same truth. No one sees everything, but together we can see more. He never spoke a word, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow, step, step, bow. He traveled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed, "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait, watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning, he bowed up the path. By noon, he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. "I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen." The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. "Master!" the scholar cried, pulling back. "The cup is full! No more will go in!" The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. "Exactly," he said. "If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen?" That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing. And now, a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. He stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital, eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The sun shimmered over the canopy of an ancient forest, casting dappled light onto the wide, glistening river that snaked through its heart. The air was rich with the scent of ripe fruit and warm leaves. Birds called lazily from the branches, and deep in this green sanctuary, there lived a great band of monkeys, free, agile, unafraid. They were led by a king, not crowned with gold nor seated on a throne, but known by every heart in the jungle as a being of rare strength, deep wisdom, and boundless love. He was the Buddha in a past life, and his name was whispered with reverence among the trees. Mahakapi, the great monkey king. The troop followed him not out of fear, but from trust. He chose the ripest fruit for the weakest among them. He led them across rivers in flood. He taught the young how to leap and the old how to rest. And when predators stalked the forest floor, he stood between his people and the teeth of death. But even such noble creatures cannot stay hidden from the eyes of kings. Far downstream, where the river widened and palace walls gleamed under the sun, there lived a human king. He was wealthy, powerful, and restless. One morning, while drinking sweet water from a golden cup, he bit into a mango unlike any he had tasted. Its flesh was fragrant, smooth, almost glowing. He turned to his servants, astonished. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. A trembling servant bowed low. "From the northern forest, Your Majesty. It was carried by the river." The king stood. "Then that forest shall be mine." And so he rode, hundreds of soldiers at his back, their armor clinking like distant thunder. Across plains, over hills, and into the great northern woods they marched, until they reached the grove where the mango tree stood. Its branches curved wide, heavy with golden fruit. And high in its arms, the monkeys feasted. The king looked up, and his joy turned to fury. "They steal what is mine," he said. "Surround the tree. Not one escapes." His archers raised their bows. The monkeys screamed and scrambled. Some fell. Some clung to the bark, trembling. Mothers shielded their babies. The tree that had fed them now became a trap. And the monkey king, Mahakapi, watched from a distance. He saw the ring of soldiers, the drawn bows, the trembling hearts of his people, and he knew there was no way down. Unless he climbed a tall cliff beside the river. From there he could see the mango tree, the forest, the fear. He wrapped his legs around the trunk of a strong bamboo stalk, measured the distance, and leapt. Across the sky he soared, limbs outstretched, heart steady. He reached the tree, but not the ground. His body caught a branch, and he hung there, arms extended, back arched across the gulf between safety and slaughter. A living bridge. He turned his head and called out, "Go! Cross me, now!" One by one, the monkeys scrambled onto his back. They clutched his fur, their tiny hands trembling. Some hesitated, some wept, but they crossed, from danger to safety, over the back of the king who held and held and held, until the last one was gone. In the grove below, the human king had seen everything. He watched the great monkey fly, watched him cling, watched him bear the weight of an entire nation, and now he watched him fall. The Monkey King's body gave out, muscles torn, spine twisted. He collapsed at the base of the tree, breath shallow, limbs crumpled like leaves after a storm. The human king approached, silent. This was not the enemy he imagined. This was not a beast. This was something else. He knelt. The Monkey King opened his eyes. "You could have run," the human king whispered. "You could have saved yourself." The monkey breathed barely. But what would a king be without his people? Tears welled in the king's eyes. He had marched to conquer, to taste fruit, to claim land. But he had found something far richer: honor, selflessness, sacrifice. He turned to his soldiers. "Tend to him," he ordered. "Treat him with care." But it was too late. The Monkey King's breath slowed and then stopped. The human king built a shrine there, beneath the mango tree, not for conquest, not for glory, but for a being who had shown him what true kingship meant. And from that day on, he ruled differently. Not with fear, but with wisdom. Not with pride, but with service. He remembered the curve of that body stretched across space, the silence in which it held, the lesson it gave. Centuries later, the story would be carved into stone, painted onto temple walls, and passed from one mouth to another like a sacred fruit. Children would ask, "Is it true? Did a monkey really give his life?" And the elders would smile. "Yes," they'd say, and in doing so, he taught the world how to live. Because sacrifice is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. And a leader is not the one who commands the most, but the one willing to give the most, even his life, for those who trust him, for the good of all. In a quiet valley, where mist clung to the morning hills and cranes walked through the wet grass, there lived an old farmer. His hands were rough from years of work, his back bent slightly, not from age, but from reverence for the earth. Each spring, without fail, he would walk into the flooded fields barefoot, carrying a satchel of seeds against his chest. And there, ankle deep in cold water, he would plant each rice seedling by hand. One, then another, then another. Row after row, hour after hour. One morning, a traveller passed by and watched the old man working. "Isn't there a faster way?" he called. The farmer didn't look up. "No." "But can't you just scatter the seeds and let them grow?" The farmer paused, then looked up, his face weathered by sun and time. He held up a single seedling, delicate and green. "If I rush this," he said, "it breaks." And then he smiled. "If I wait, it feeds a village." That is the lesson of the rice seedling. Not speed, not force, but patience. Because some things, especially the most important things, cannot be hurried. They need water, warmth, space, and time. We live in a world that rushes. We want answers now, results now, relief now. But the Dharma, like rice, grows slowly. You sit on the cushion. You breathe. Thoughts rise like insects on the water. You breathe again. Nothing seems to change. But underground, beneath your noticing, something roots itself. Just as the seed splits in darkness before any green breaks the surface. There is a story from the Buddha's life. A man came to him, desperate for wisdom. He asked for enlightenment in a single sitting. The Buddha said, "How long did it take the mango tree to bear fruit?" The man shrugged. "I don't know, a few seasons." The Buddha nodded. "And how many times did you pull at its branches to make it grow faster?" The man blinked. "None. That would harm it." The Buddha smiled. "Then why do you do that to your mind?" A rice seedling cannot be coaxed with impatience. It cannot be screamed into sprouting. It will not bloom on command. But if you plant it, nourish it, protect it from harm, it grows. And when the time is right, it gives back. Generously, silently, completely. Patience is not passivity. It is an active trust. It is waking every day to tend what may not show results. It is believing that something unseen is forming. Not because of magic, but because that is how life moves. There is another story. A young monk grew frustrated with his progress. He complained to his teacher, "I've been practicing for months. I still feel restless, still distracted, still myself." The teacher led him outside, pointed to the mountain, and said, "You're like someone walking uphill while staring at their feet. You can't see how far you've come because you're only looking at the mud. Growth is rarely visible when it's happening. You notice it in hindsight, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the way you hold silence, in the way you speak a little softer when someone's voice shakes. That is the seedling rising. Sometimes the field floods, sometimes birds eat the first shoot. Sometimes the sun is too strong, and still, the farmer returns. He doesn't uproot everything in frustration. He doesn't curse the seed. He waits. He plants again. Because patience is not about perfect conditions. It's about keeping faith through imperfect ones. Commentary. The rice seedling is not just a symbol. It is a mirror. A reminder that your growth does not need to be dramatic to be real. That your slow, quiet efforts are not wasted. That every time you return to your breath, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you pause before reacting, you are planting something. And like the farmer, you may not see it today, you may not see it next week, but one day when someone asks how you became calm or kind or steady dash, you'll smile and think of all those unseen days, all those early mornings in the field, all those seedlings that grew while no one was watching. The path is long, but you are walking it, and that is enough. The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." "Then what is it?" he asked. "A copy," she guessed. Renji turned to her. "And what is your idea of yourself?" She blinked. "A reflection." Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop! The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. "Does the moon mind?" he asked. Kaoru laughed softly. "No." "Does the moon change?" "No," she said again. Renji looked at her gently. "Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not." That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, "I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth." The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, "What is real?" Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, "The moon and the water." She explained, "The moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth." The philosopher nodded slowly. "That is poetic, but how do you know it's true?" Kaoru looked up. "Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face." That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, "Do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself." And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. Pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever, and yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it." The prince stared at the man as he passed. The way he paused to catch his breath, the way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. A solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish. Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow, a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self, his earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. It was the fifth night of the waxing moon. The air in Kapilavastu was still, not silent, but hushed, as though the stars had gathered at the edges of the world to listen. The palace walls breathed in jasmine and sandalwood. Lamps flickered gently, servants whispered down the halls. And in the royal chamber, Queen Maya of the Shakya clan slept. Her breath moved softly. Her hands rested over her womb, though she did not yet know why. Outside, the moon hung high, full, radiant, unblinking. And beneath that silver light, a dream came to her. Not wild, not fevered, but clear, like water holding the shape of the moon. The dream. She found herself in a quiet grove. It was not the palace, and yet it felt familiar. There were trees, tall and old. Their trunks curved like dancers, their leaves whispering secrets from lifetimes ago. She stood barefoot, wrapped in white. No crown, no jewels, only peace, and above her, the moon glowed brighter than it ever had, a luminous pearl suspended in sky. Then the winds parted, and from the east he came. A white elephant, vast and radiant, walked across the clouds, 6 tusks curved like ivory moons. Each footstep landed without sound, as though the earth bowed beneath him. His eyes were gentle, his ears like lotus petals. His skin shimmered, not with brilliance, but with quiet power. He carried a white lotus in his trunk, and he came to her, not with force, not with haste, but with the serenity of one who knows where he is going. She did not step back. She did not fear. She simply stood and watched. And when he reached her, he bowed, as if to offer the lotus, as if to ask permission. She lowered her gaze, and in that moment, the elephant entered her side. There was no pain, only light, only warmth, as though the moon had moved into her body, as though the entire sky now rested inside her. And in that light, she saw a vision, a child, radiant, seated on a lotus, surrounded by devas and sages, stepping not into royalty, but into destiny. She saw the turning of wheels, the shifting of ages, the crumbling of illusion, and then the dream dissolved. Waking, Maya woke before the birds. The sun had not yet touched the mountains. The oil lamp beside her flickered once, then settled. The chamber was silent, but her hands, still resting over her abdomen, were warm, and her heart beat not with confusion, but with awe. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in soft cloth. She moved through the halls like moonlight and summoned her attendants. "I have seen something," she said. "Call the king, call the sages, call the dream readers and wise ones, bring the astrologers." And they came, with scrolls, with incense, with knowing eyes. She recounted every detail. The forest, the moon, the elephant, the lotus, the peace. They listened, they nodded. And at last, the eldest among them, a man with a voice like woven silk, spoke. "Your dream is not of the ordinary world. It is the sign of a great birth. The child in your womb is no ordinary prince. He will be a Chakravartin, a turner of the wheel. He will change the world. If he remains in the palace, he will become a king of kings. But if he sees the sorrows of the world, he will turn from gold to truth and become a Buddha." The king placed a hand upon her shoulder, not with doubt, but with wonder, because even he, strong, worldly, wise, felt something stirring, something vast, something that had no name yet. The months. As the days passed, the kingdom watched Queen Maya with quiet reverence. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed slightly earlier. The air around her felt cooler, gentler. Children stopped crying as she passed. Strangers bowed, unsure why. She herself changed. She laughed more easily. She wept with the songs of birds. She dreamed of stars and rivers and ancient trees. She felt the child grow, not just within her body, but as if within the world itself. And one day, near the time of birth, she asked to travel to her ancestral home. It was the tradition of her people, but more than tradition, It was a quiet longing. The king arranged everything, silks and guards, chariots and attendants. But Maya moved simply. She chose only a few companions and rode through forests and open roads beneath a sky filled with soft clouds. The birth. They stopped at Lumbini, a grove of sal trees, green and peaceful. The sun filtered through the canopy. The wind carried the scent of blossoms. Birdsong drifted like prayer. Maya stepped down, drawn to the trees. She held a branch, looked upward, and in that moment, beneath the same moon she had seen in her dream, she gave birth. The child came easily, without struggle, without fear. He did not cry. He simply opened his eyes, wide and calm, and the legends say he took 7 steps, that lotus flowers bloomed beneath each foot, that he raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth and said, "I am born for the benefit of all beings." The attendants wept. The forest fell silent, and the trees, it is said, bowed ever so slightly toward the child. Maya held him to her chest, and though she had seen him in vision, this was different. This was not dream. This was real. The warmth of skin, the weight of life, the beginning of something vast and quiet and beautiful. She did not live long after the birth. Some say it was destiny. That one who gives birth to a Buddha must return to the heavens. That her role was complete. Others say she became a guiding spirit, watching over him from a celestial realm, offering protection in moments when the path turned dark. But her presence never vanished. The child, Siddhartha, would one day walk away from his palace, would one day sit beneath a tree and awaken, would one day teach the world how to end suffering. But it began here, with a dream, with a white elephant, with a moonlit vow whispered across the veil of sleep, and with a mother who said yes, because every journey begins before we can name it. Every great awakening begins in the quiet, and sometimes the first step toward truth is a dream. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a small mountain village, there lived an old flute maker named Rin. He worked alone in a simple hut of wood and clay, high on the ridge where the wind whispered through pine trees and children ran barefoot through the fields below. People came from far away to buy his flutes. Not because they were beautiful, though they were. Not because they were perfect, though they were close. But because something in them felt alive. One day, a young monk came to visit. He had heard stories of Rin's flutes, how some made people weep, others laugh, and one even caused a dog to howl in tune. The monk bowed and asked, "Master Rin, what makes your flutes so special?" Rin smiled without answering. Instead, he handed the monk a piece of smooth bamboo, carved, polished, hollow. "Blow," he said. The monk lifted the flute and tried. A weak, wheezing note escaped, thin as a whisper. Rin nodded. Again. The monk tried again, and again. Each time, the sound changed, until finally a single clear note rang out, clean as the mountain air. Rin nodded. "You see? The music does not come from the bamboo. It comes from the emptiness inside it, and from the way you breathe." This is the story of form and emptiness, and how what is useful is not the thing itself, but the space it holds. Commentary. The flute is made of matter, but what gives it purpose? Not the wood, not the shape, not the polish. It is the emptiness within. Shaped just right, so that when breath enters, it becomes sound. So too with us. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." To the ordinary ear, that sounds like a riddle. To the listening heart, it is truth. Your body is form. Your thoughts are form. Your emotions, your stories, your name, they all arise from conditions, but none of them are you. They are the flute. What makes them meaningful is the awareness that moves through them, like breath through bamboo. Emptiness is not nothing. It is potential. It is the space in a cup that holds the tea, the silence between notes that makes a melody, the pause before words that gives them power. Rin once said to the monk, "Most people think meaning comes from fullness, but it comes from what is left open." The monk stayed for many weeks. Each morning he swept the hut, carried water, sat in stillness while Rin carved. One afternoon he asked, "Can I make one?" Rin handed him a piece of bamboo and nodded. The monk worked slowly, cutting, hollowing, shaping. It took days. When he finished, he brought it to Rin. The old man held it up to the light, blew a note. It was off, slightly strained, slightly flat. Rin smiled. "Too tight," he said. "You feared the emptiness, so you made it small." The monk stared at his work, then quietly broke it open. Started again. In meditation, we often try to fill the mind, with effort, with silence, with ideas of what awakening should be. But the deeper path is not filling. It is hollowing, letting go, trusting that when the space is clear, truth will flow through, like breath through a flute. Rin never became famous. He never left the mountain. But the sound of his flutes traveled far, across rivers, over cities, into temples, because what he crafted was not just bamboo. He crafted emptiness given shape. When Rin passed away, the villagers held no grand ceremony. They placed his tools in a wooden box, left a single flute on his pillow, and when the wind blew through the hut, it made the faintest sound, a high, pure note, like something remembering its shape. So next time you feel broken, too empty to be useful, too hollow to matter, remember, the hollow reed sings, the empty cup holds, the quiet breath becomes a song. In the heart of the city of Vaishali, not far from the clamour of markets and the perfume of jasmine, there lived a man unlike any other. He was wealthy, yes. His robes dyed in saffron and silk, his estate wide as a lake. He was respected, known to governors and scholars alike. He was a householder, a father, a merchant, but more than that, he was awake. His name was Vimalakirti. Unlike the monks, he did not wear simple robes. Unlike the ascetics, he did not live in the forest. He lived in the world, but not of it. He walked through noise with the silent mind. He moved through illusion without being caught. And so his teachings were sharper than sermons, his presence more disruptive than thunder. One day, it was said that Vimalakirti had fallen ill, not from weakness, but from compassion. He had taken on the sickness of the world so others might awaken. Word reached the Buddha and his disciples, so the Buddha asked, "Who will go and visit the ailing Vimalakirti?" One by one, the great disciples declined. Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, Ananda. Each said, "Master, I cannot. I have debated Vimalakirti before, and I was humbled." Because this layman, this non-monk, non-official, had a clarity that even the great arhats could not match. His words undid your logic. His questions pierced through pride. He was kind, but unshakably sharp. At last the Buddha turned to Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Manjushri, without hesitation, said, "I will go." So Manjushri entered the city, accompanied by heavenly beings, monks and devas. He found Vimalakirti reclining on a simple bed beneath a flowering tree. His eyes were calm, his illness invisible, his presence unmistakable. Manjushri bowed. "Venerable one," he said, "how should a bodhisattva view the world?" A simple question. And Vimalakirti answered not with poetry, but with paradox. A bodhisattva views the world as a magician views an illusion, as a dream, as a mirage, as a bubble on water. Manjushri asked again, "What is the root of this illness?" Vimalakirti replied, "The root of my sickness is the sickness of all beings. When they are healed, I will be healed too." And then he began to teach, not with lectures, but with reversals. He said a bodhisattva must live in the world without being trapped by it, must speak without attachment to words, must enter duality in order to transcend it. His home became a Dharma hall, his bed a throne of emptiness. Then came the final deepest question. Manjushri asked, "What is the ultimate teaching of non-duality?" One by one, the assembled bodhisattvas gave answers, each profound, each poetic. They spoke of emptiness, of no birth and no death, of neither here nor there, of neither self nor other. Each spoke in turn, until all had spoken. Then they turned to Vimalakirti and asked, What is your answer? Vimalakirti looked at them, smiled, and said, "Nothing." He remained completely silent. No gesture, no word, just presence. And in that moment, the hall fell still. Even the wind paused at the edge of the window. And the bodhisattvas understood, because that, his silence, was the answer. Beyond yes and no, beyond concepts, beyond even the word beyond. Only direct knowing, unspoken and complete. Commentary. The Vimalakirti Sutra is not just a scripture, it is a mirror, held up to the part of us that clings to roles, to robes, to rank, to rhetoric. It reminds us, wisdom is not a matter of appearance, and truth is not always spoken. Vimalakirti was not a monk, but he understood Dharma more deeply than most. He owned property, but was not owned by it. He lived among crowds, but dwelled in emptiness. He used language, but was not trapped by it. And when the time came to speak of non-duality, he let silence do the speaking. Sometimes, silence is escape. But sometimes, it is clarity, not a refusal, but a revelation. A silence so full, it says everything. There's a Zen saying, when the mouth is closed, the Dharma speaks most clearly. This is what Vimalakirti embodied, the wordless transmission, the truth beyond fingers pointing to moons. In our world, we often rush to speak, to fill the space, to define, to prove. But Vimalakirti teaches, when we stop grasping, when we stop arranging words like armor, what remains is presence. The silence was not empty, it was alive. It was not passive, it was the roar of no self. It dismantled even the idea of someone giving an answer, and left only this. You don't have to be a monk to wake up. You don't have to renounce your life. You have to see through it, and then live with depth, with clarity, with compassion, from within the illusion, while no longer fooled by it. Vimalakirti's room is still here. Every moment you stop trying to win the argument. Every time you stop needing to prove you're wise. Every time you rest in the space before thought. You are sitting beside him, and you are silent too. The forest lay still beneath the afternoon sun, warm and golden, its edges softened by the hush of tall grass and the rustle of distant leaves. Along a winding riverbank, deer moved like whispers, elegant, careful, serene. They drank from the clear water, nibbled the green shoots, and lifted their heads with ears poised to catch the smallest sound. Among them walked a deer, unlike the others. Tall, golden brown, with a coat that shimmered like silk, and eyes that held not fear, but understanding. He was the Buddha in a life long before his final birth. And he was known as the king of the banyan deer. In this forest, two great herds lived side by side, the banyan deer and the branch deer. Each herd had its king, but only one ruled with wisdom and mercy. The king of the banyan deer cared for his herd as a father cares for his children. He ensured the weakest were protected. He shared shade and water with all. And when conflict stirred, he calmed it with reason, never violence. But far beyond the forest, beyond even the river's reach, sat a palace of polished stone. There lived a human king, powerful, proud, and enamored with the hunt. He loved the thrill of the chase, the cries of hounds, the clatter of hooves, the fall of the body. But he grew tired of riding so far for the kill. And so one day he declared, "Let the deer be driven into the royal park. I will hunt them there at my leisure." His men rode into the forest, scattering the herds. Mothers called for fawns. Hooves pounded through brush and mud, and by force, fear and fire, hundreds of deer were herded into the park's high-walled grounds. The king of the banyan deer and the king of the branch deer were among them. The hunt began. Each day, the human king would enter the park and fire his arrows. The deer ran. Many fell. The others huddled in dread, knowing not who would die next. So the two deer kings came together. "This cannot go on," said the banyan deer. "Too many suffer. Too many die. There must be a way to spare the herd greater agony." The branch deer narrowed his eyes. "You would deal with the hunter?" "No," said the banyan deer. "I would speak to the man." That night, while the moon hung low and silent, the banyan deer stood at the gates of the palace. The guards laughed at first until they saw his eyes. They led him in, and the next morning, the king, amused by the boldness of the creature, agreed to listen. "You are brave to come," he said, "but also foolish. Speak, and I may spare you, or I may make a rug of your hide." The deer bowed his head, not in fear, but in respect. "My lord," he said calmly, "your arrows fall without pattern. The deer live in terror. Let there be order. Each day we will offer one deer willingly. No chase, no cruelty. Just one life, given so the rest may live without panic." The court gasped. The king blinked. "You would offer your own kind?" "To save many, yes." The king, impressed by this wisdom, agreed. And so it was that each day, one deer came forward, chosen in turn, first from the branch deer, then from the banyan deer. There was no fleeing, no screaming, only quiet surrender. But one morning, the chosen deer did not come. Instead, a young doe, trembling thin, appeared at the palace gate, her eyes wide with grief. "My lord," she whispered, bowing low, "today was my husband's turn, but I have just birthed a fawn. If I die today, it will surely perish." She wept softly. "Please, let me live just a little longer. Let someone else take my place. Let me nurse it just until it walks." The king said nothing. He looked at his ministers, at his guards, at the doe, crouched low and shaking. Then he said, "No, the order is the order. You must go." The deer turned her head to hide her sobs. But before the guards could move, a shadow stepped into the courtyard. Tall, still, golden, the king of the banyan deer. "I will take her place," he said. The king frowned. "But it is not your turn. She is from the branch deer herd." "I do not care," said the banyan deer. "A life is a life, and compassion does not ask about herd or rank." The court fell silent. The deer turned to the doe and lowered his head. "Go, raise your child." The human king stood, his face unreadable. "You would die for one not your own, for one you do not even know." "Yes," the deer said, "because I do know her. She is like me. She feels fear. She loves her child, and I will not let her weep alone." The king sat back down slowly. No one spoke. And then, with a deep breath, he looked to the sky above. What kind of creature gives his life for another? The deer said simply, "One who understands that all life is the same." The king rose. "No more," he said. "No more killing. No more hunting. Not here. Not in the park. Not in the forest." He turned to his court. "Let the gates be opened. Let them go free." And so it was. The deer returned to the wild. The herds rejoined. The mother nursed her child beneath the whispering trees. And the king of the banyan deer stood once more at the edge of the river, watching, not for enemies, but for peace. In time, the story spread, told around fires, carved into temple walls, painted in soft colors across ancient scrolls. And always it bore the same lesson. To speak truth to power is rare. To speak with compassion is rarer still. But to do both without fear, even to your own risk, that is the mark of true nobility. Even in a deer, even in a forest, even when the one you face holds arrows and gold. Because courage is not always loud. Sometimes it bows low. Sometimes it says, "Let me go instead." And sometimes it changes the heart of a king. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next. In a cafe by the park, a young boy sat across from his mother. The table was small, just enough for 2 mugs, 1 half-drunk hot chocolate, and a croissant with a single bite missing. The boy had soft curls, curious eyes, shoes that lit up when he kicked his feet beneath the table. He watched his mother, hoping for her eyes. But she was scrolling, thumb steady, neck bent, face bathed in blue light. She nodded every now and then, murmured a but her gaze stayed tethered to the glowing screen. This is not a story about blame. It's a story about forgetting, about the quiet erosion of presence, and the way a moment, once missed, does not return. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a rock. Not a fancy one, just smooth, grey, shaped like a teardrop. He set it gently on the table, waited. She scrolled. He tapped it with a finger, rolled it in a little circle, whispered something to it. She didn't look up. The server passed by and smiled at the boy. "Is that your treasure?" The boy nodded. The mother didn't hear. Presence isn't always taken. Sometimes it is quietly surrendered. We trade it for urgency, for likes, for news we cannot change. And meanwhile, a child sits across from us, glowing not with pixels, but with life. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." But the present must be chosen. It cannot shout louder than a screen. Later that day, the mother posted a photo. "Hot chocolate with my little one, coffee heart grateful." The boy was blurry in the background, looking at her. She never noticed. One day, the rock was gone, replaced by a drawing. 2 stick figures, one big, one small, holding hands. The sky above them filled with birds that looked like wide letter V's. He slid it across the table. She liked it, said, "Cute," snapped a photo, shared it instantly. Didn't ask what the birds were, didn't ask if the smaller figure was sad. But the boy said nothing. Children know how to speak through absence. Presence is not just being near. It is attention. It is seeing the person across from you, as if this moment will never come again, because it won't. One afternoon, the boy stopped bringing things. No rock, no drawings, just silence. He stirred his chocolate with slow circles, watched the steam rise and disappear, watched her eyes disappear too. Then one day, the phone died. Just as she reached for it, the screen went black. The world returned. She blinked, looked around, looked at him. He stared back, wide-eyed. Hope and doubt mixed in his quiet. She reached across the table, took his hand. For the first time in a long time, he didn't pull away. They sat like that for 5 minutes, not speaking, just holding the now. When the server came to clear the table, the boy whispered, "She's back." The server smiled. "Yes, I see. Presence does not demand perfection, only noticing, only returning, again and again, like breath." Years later, when the boy was older, he would keep the old rock in a box. It would feel heavier than he remembered, not because of weight, but because of what it once tried to carry. Presence is fragile, but it is also forgiving. One moment missed does not cancel the next. The child is still waiting, not in punishment, but in invitation. And the phone. It remained in her bag the next time they came. Not because she hated it, but because she finally saw the better screen. The one with his eyes. In a bustling monastery near the edge of the forest, there stood a tall wooden ladder. It led nowhere in particular. It was propped against an old stone wall at the edge of the courtyard, half covered in moss, its rungs worn smooth by generations of use. But no one used it for repairs. No one climbed it to reach anything. It was part of a practice, a koan in physical form, a ritual passed down from teacher to student, without ever being fully explained. Each new monk during their first week was asked to climb the ladder. No instructions. No context, just climb. Some did so eagerly. Some hesitated. Some asked, "What's the point?" The elder monks would only smile and say, "You'll see." One by one, the novices ascended. Halfway up, some laughed. Some grew nervous. Some clung tightly and looked down, unsure why they were up there at all. And eventually they came down, some with a shrug, some with a question, some with a strange quiet in their chest. One student, clever and ambitious, asked to climb the ladder a second time, then a third. He began to climb it every morning, faster each time. He polished the rungs, measured his speed, counted steps. Soon, he believed himself the best climber in the monastery. "Look how steady I am," he told a fellow monk. "Look how others struggle, but I've mastered it." The old teacher heard him, but said nothing. Not yet. Then one foggy morning, the student climbed the ladder again. This time, he brought a small bell and rang it proudly at the top, announcing his arrival to the courtyard below. The monks turned, some with amusement, some with discomfort. The old teacher approached and said quietly, "You've climbed very high, but have you noticed? There is nothing up there." The student frowned. "I climbed to improve myself," he said. to rise above, to be better. The teacher looked at him kindly. Then you are climbing a ladder of ego, and that ladder goes nowhere. The student froze. He looked down at the mossy stones below, at the monks who stood waiting, not judging. And in that moment, something in him cracked open. The teacher continued. Each rung you climb thinking it makes you superior is another step away from what you truly are. Real growth does not make you taller than others. It makes you more able to kneel beside them. He descended slowly, for the first time, with no pride in his chest. Just breathe, just stillness, just a strange, welcome sense of returning to earth. This is the parable of the ladder of ego. In life, we often climb. Status, wealth, validation, mastery, spiritual progress, intellect, fame. Each rung promises something. Now I'll be enough. Now they'll respect me. Now I can rest. But at the top, we often find nothing. No summit. No answer. Just more sky. The Buddha warned of this subtle trap. The ego does not always show itself through arrogance. Sometimes it appears as spiritual pride, as goodness that separates, as quiet superiority disguised as humility. True awakening is not a climb, it is a return, a coming back to the place where there is nothing to prove, no one to impress, no summit to reach, only presence, only now. There's an old Zen story. A young man asked a master, "How long until I am enlightened?" The master replied, 10 years. "And if I try very hard?" the student asked. 20, said the master. The harder we climb in pursuit of self, the farther we drift from what is not self. The more we grip the ladder, the more we miss the ground. Commentary: the ladder of ego is invisible, but heavy. It lives in comparison, in judgment, in the quiet belief, I'm a little better than them. Even in spiritual practice, it whispers, look how mindful I am. Look how patient I've become. Look how others still struggle. But real growth is silent. It doesn't need a bell at the top. It rings quietly in the heart and says, let go. You may climb, yes, but ask, why? If the climb brings you closer to compassion, keep going. If it takes you farther from others, come down. Sometimes the real practice is to descend, to sit beside, to listen, to walk with, not above. In the monastery courtyard, the ladder still stands, weathered, unused, but not forgotten. Now, it serves as a reminder, not of reaching, but of returning. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. She had heard hundreds of stories. Pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly. Teenage boy, 17. Sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern." The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people. Not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed, in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing, no paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he traveled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen traveled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally, he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labor. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. The same quiet voice, the same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The 3rd edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often, the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up, and that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. At the edge of a quiet village stood a tree unlike any other. It wasn't tall, wasn't radiant, didn't blossom with brilliant colors in spring, but still, people came. Not to pick fruit, not to seek shade, not to carve initials into its bark. They came to sit, to rest, to listen. Because it whispered, no one knew why. Some said it was the way the wind passed through its hollow trunk. Others believed it was the spirit of an old monk who had meditated there long ago. Children said the tree could speak. Old farmers said it could hear. But whatever the cause, the tree made a soft sound, like breath through a flute, or the hush of cloth moving gently through air. Just enough to quiet your mind. People began to visit it when their hearts were heavy. A woman grieving the loss of her son sat at its roots each morning. She never spoke, but the wind in the branches moved with such rhythm that her shoulders softened, and her tears fell without shame. A man who had lost his business sat by the trunk each evening after working odd jobs in town. He didn't pray, he didn't ask, he simply listened, and each night his breath grew steadier. Even monks came from temples near and far, not to teach, not to chant, but to sit in silence beside the tree, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. One traveler asked the village elder, "What does it say?" The elder smiled. "Nothing. That's the point." This is the story of presence without performance, of healing without explanation, of a silence that doesn't fix, but holds. There are trees in all of us, places in our heart that don't shine loudly, don't offer dazzling gifts, don't do anything, but simply are. And that is enough in a world that demands noise, results, progress, answers, opinions, profiles, performances. The whispering tree reminds us, silence is not emptiness. It is a kind of presence too deep for words. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. And better still, perhaps, is no word at all, just presence, just sitting, just being." In the Zen tradition, some masters would respond to students' deepest questions by raising a finger, or drawing a circle in the air, or remaining completely silent. Not because they had no answer, but because the answer could not be spoken. It had to be realized. The whispering tree was like that. It taught nothing, but revealed everything, if you stayed long enough. There's a story of a student who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the mountain. The student frowned. "I don't understand." The master said, "That's because you're still trying to. Some truths don't want to be understood. They want to be felt, held in stillness, carried in the breath." Commentary. We are conditioned to speak, to respond, to fill silences, to offer advice, to explain our pain, to solve others' suffering. But sometimes what's needed is none of that. Sometimes what's needed is what the whispering tree offered. Presence without pressure, silence without absence, listening without fixing. The mind wants sound. The ego wants performance. But the heart wants stillness. It wants to be seen without being judged, heard without being analyzed, held without being improved. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to fix yourself or anyone else. Sometimes just being there with your whole attention is the most sacred act. The whispering tree didn't change anyone. It didn't speak truths, didn't prescribe practices, didn't offer instructions. But people left it feeling lighter, not because they got something, but because they let something go. Let go of the need to perform, to be impressive, to be certain, to be healed already. Let yourself be the tree. Let yourself be the wind. Let yourself be the stillness between the branches. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything. So, when you don't know what to say, don't. When someone is hurting and you want to help, sit with them. When your own heart feels messy, wordless, unsure, be still. Let the whispering begin inside, and trust that silence is a teacher too. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between two worlds. It was spring. The trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day, it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real. Petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air. and the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing, streams paused their song, and even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the seventh step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth traveled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came Asita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness." And he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, "The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear. I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented, it is remembered." like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. The sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him, because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. "A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken." Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. "Should we stop flying?" asked one. "No," said the wise quail, "but we must act together." He showed them a plan. "If one is caught in the net," he said, "do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly." "To freedom?" a small chick asked. He nodded. "Yes, together." The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out, but the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong, and together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. "Strange," he muttered. "I've never seen birds do that." He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. "Clever little things," he muttered. "But they won't always be united." And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, two young quail quarreled. "You always land too close," snapped one. "You always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. "Remember," he said, "the net does not care who is right, only who is divided." But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The two angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. "Lift with us," they called. But the two snapped at each other. "You grab that side!" "No, you're too slow." Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down, the fowler emerged from the trees. And that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke, not in anger, but with sorrow. Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy. In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall. But if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart, even the strongest snare cannot hold us. It is said that if you gaze long enough at the full moon, you may see not a face, but a shape, a small, still shape, hunched and silent, a hair, curled in the center of silver light. In forests and villages, monks and children alike have told the story of how that hair came to be there, not for magic, but for meaning. Because once, long ago, when the Buddha lived a life not as a king, not as a sage, but as a simple forest hare, he offered something no other could. The forest in those days was peaceful. The trees were tall and generous, the rivers clear, the days warm, and the nights cool like silk. And in a soft clearing where sunlight filtered through leaves like golden rain, there lived 4 friends, a monkey, an otter, a jackal, and a hare. Each day they met beneath the same fig tree. They shared stories, laughed together, and vowed to live simply, offering kindness to all creatures. The hare, though smallest, was the quiet heart of the group. He spoke little, but listened well. He never hoarded, never pushed. And his silence made room for the truth in others to unfold. One day, the hare turned to his friends as they sat in the cool shade. "Tomorrow is the holy day," he said softly. "The day of giving. If someone comes to us in need, we must give all we can." The others nodded eagerly. "I will gather fish from the river," said the otter. "I will collect ripe mangoes and figs," said the monkey. "I will steal curdled milk from the village shrine," said the jackal, grinning. The hare said nothing. "What about you?" they asked. He looked down. "I have no fruit, no claws to fish, no cleverness to steal. All I eat is grass." He looked up at the sky. "So, if someone comes in need, I will give them myself." The others fell silent. The wind stirred the fig leaves above them, and somewhere far off, as though moved by the weight of the hare's words, the world shifted. That night, as stars bloomed across the sky, the great deity Chakra, ruler of the heavens, heard of the hare's vow. He was curious. Among all the creatures, who would truly give without pride? Who would offer not for reward, but for love? So Chakra descended to earth, not in thunder or gold, but disguised as an old, starving hermit, his robe tattered, his hands trembling with hunger. At dawn, he approached the clearing. The four friends welcomed him with reverence. "I am hungry," he said. "I have not eaten in days." The otter offered his fresh fish. The monkey gave sweet mangoes. The jackal, grinning, placed stolen butter and curds at his feet. Then the hare stepped forward. "I have nothing," he said gently, "but I will not break my vow." He turned to his friends. "Build a fire." They looked at him in confusion. He nodded. "Yes, a fire." As the flames rose, the hare bowed before the hermit. "I offer you the only thing I have, my body." And with that, he leapt toward the fire. But the flames did not burn. They shimmered and vanished. And in their place stood Chakra, radiant in divine form, his eyes filled with both sorrow and awe. "O noble hare," he said, "you were willing to give your very life without hesitation, without desire for praise. In all the worlds, I have not seen a gift so pure." He reached down and gently lifted the hare. "I will not let you die. Instead, your story shall live beyond this forest, beyond this age." Chakra turned his gaze to the sky, and with a wave of his hand, he painted the hare's image on the moon. From that day on, when the full moon rises over rivers and rice fields, over temples and rooftops and sleeping children, the hare watches from above. Not as a god, not as a legend, but as a reminder that the greatest gift is not gold, not grain, not clever words or rituals. It is the gift of selfless love. In time, the monkey, the otter, and even the jackal remembered the moment not with sorrow, but with wonder. They told it to their children. The forest grew quiet when the moon was full, and the fig tree always held a soft space beneath it, as if waiting. The story of the hare passed from mouth to mouth, country to country, century to century, and even now, if you ask an elder monk or a village storyteller why the moon glows so brightly, they may smile and say, "It's the light of a little forest hare." Still giving, still watching, still reminding us what it means to love completely. Because generosity is not measured in size, but in sincerity. And there is no gift greater than offering your whole self, freely, without fear. Not for recognition, but because it is right. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. A group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with a story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then he raised his hand. An arrow strikes him. The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow." He paused, but then the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. "That is the second arrow." Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. "The first arrow," the Buddha said, "is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages, illness comes, people leave us, we are wounded by life, by loss, by chance." He drew a line in the dirt with his finger. "But the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves." He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. "So the suffering comes not only from what happens," he said, "but from how the mind meets it." The Buddha smiled. "Exactly." A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. "But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain?" The Buddha's gaze was kind. "He may cry out," he said, "but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison." He looked at Rahula. "You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain." The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, "I will never be whole again," or "I should have done more," that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. "Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it." An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. "I have carried many arrows in my life," he said softly. "Not in the flesh, but in memory." The Buddha nodded. "The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot." He looked toward the trees. "But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes." A silence followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. "You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve, or ache, or tremble." He gestured to his own chest. "This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow." He placed his hand upon the ground. "But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, 'This is me, this is mine, this is forever.'" He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, "Even the fire burns only what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally, like a wound that knows how to heal. A fisherman rose each morning before dawn. He lived at the edge of a still bay, where mist rolled in like a soft breath and the world moved slowly. Each day, he cast his net into the water, not with force, not with haste, just one gentle sweep into the unknown. Sometimes the catch was good. Other times, the net came up nearly empty. But he never cursed the sea. He simply folded the net, sat quietly by the shore, and waited for light. One morning, as he gathered the net, he noticed something strange. Tangled in the threads was not a fish, but a stone. Smooth, dark, heavy. He tried to shake it loose, but it wouldn't budge. So he tugged, pulled, cut a thread. But the more he worked, the more tangled the net became. What once was open and fluid now clung to itself in knots. The sun rose, the tide shifted, and the fisherman sat with his hands full of threads and tension. A monk walking nearby saw him and paused. She watched for a while, then sat beside him. They sat in silence. Then she asked, "Why are you still holding the stone?" The fisherman looked down, surprised. "I don't know," he said. "It was just there. I didn't ask for it, but now I can't let go." The monk nodded slowly, then said, "The mind is like your net, and thoughts are like what it catches. Some nourish us, some weigh us down. The skill is not in holding tighter, the skill is in knowing when to let go." The fisherman blinked. He looked at the stone again, noticed its weight, its stillness, and then, without force, he simply opened his hand. The stone dropped, and in the silence that followed, the net softened. This is the teaching. The mind is always casting, always sweeping the depths of the world. And each moment, it brings something up. A memory, a judgment, a craving, a fear, a plan, a worry. You didn't ask for it, but it's there. And what you do next is the practice. In meditation, you begin to notice the stones. You sit quietly and the mind casts its net. Up come thoughts, endless, streaming. Some small and harmless, some sticky and sharp, some heavy and loud, and the habit is to grab them, to pull them closer, to replay the argument, to solve the unsolvable, to panic over the future, to narrate the self. But the teaching is simple. Open your hand, let it drop, return to the breath, again and again. This is not avoidance. It is freedom. It is not denial. It is discernment. Because not every thought deserves your grip. Some are just passing fish, some are driftwood, and some are stones that were never yours to carry. The mind wants to collect, wants to store, wants to turn everything into me and mine. But the Dharma says, there is no need to fill your net with every thought. Let the sea give and take. Let the net remain open. Let stillness return. There is a Zen saying, let your thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Do not hold on to any of them. And another, you cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. The fisherman became a student of this practice. He still rose early, still cast his net, but he no longer feared the weight of unwanted things. He had learned to pause, to breathe, to release. One day, another fisherman asked him, "Why do you never struggle anymore?" And he replied, "Because I stopped thinking the stone had to be mine." Commentary. The mind is a marvel, but also a trickster. It offers thoughts like a street vendor offering wares. Here, it says, worry about this. Remember this insult. Fear this loss. Fix this person. Solve this world. You don't need to buy everything it sells. You can say, "Not today," and return to the silence underneath. This parable teaches non-attachment to thought, not by suppression, but by seeing clearly, this is just a stone. It came up in my net, and now I let it go. Sometimes you'll catch a golden truth, a loving memory, a calm realization. Hold it gently and let it go too, because even beauty becomes burden when clutched too long. In the end, all thoughts pass, like tides, like clouds, like weather across the sky of mind. You are not the net. You are not the catch. You are the sea and the stillness beneath. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, he was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed. Only the blink of an eye. He sat up, and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved, he cried, he endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now, clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree or beside a river or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither. I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly. Breathe and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wait kindly inside it. At the edge of the monastery was a pond, small, shallow, ringed with moss-covered stones. No fish swam in it, no lilies bloomed. It was quiet, so quiet you could hear dragonflies land on its surface. The monks would pass it daily on the way to morning meditation. Most gave it no thought. But one monk, young, curious, still a little wild in the heart, began to stop beside it each dawn. He would pick up a pebble, hold it, feel its weight, then toss it gently into the still water, and each time he would watch the ripples move outward, soft circles expanding from the center until they kissed the edges of the pond and vanished. One morning, the head teacher stood beside him. "You throw a pebble every day," he said. "Why?" The young monk didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I think I'm watching how something so small still affects everything." The teacher smiled, bent down, picked up his own stone, and said, "Every thought, every word, every action is a pebble in the pond of life." Then he let it fall. Ripples. The young monk began to understand that karma is not punishment or reward. It's simply the rippling of causes. What you do echoes. What you think spreads. Even in silence, something moves outward from you. That evening, while sweeping the courtyard, the young monk accidentally knocked over a jug of water. It splashed against the steps of the shrine. He froze, panicked, but the teacher, watching nearby, only nodded. "You see," he said, "another ripple, but not all ripples are wrong. Just seen." The monk began to practice more carefully. Not just his posture, but his thoughts. He noticed how anger, even when not spoken, changed the air around him. How a quiet smile offered to a passerby lingered like incense. One day, a traveler came to the monastery. Troubled, distracted, unable to sit still during meditation. The young monk didn't say much, just poured him tea, listened, and as the man left, bowed gently. Later, the traveler returned, calmer. He said, "I don't know what helped me, but something about your silence made me feel still. A ripple. Not grand, not loud, just a movement born from presence." There is a story in Zen. A student asked, "How do I change the world?" The teacher replied, "Change the shape of the stone you drop into it." The young monk continued to visit the pond, but now he didn't throw pebbles each day. Sometimes he just sat, watching the water hold its breath. Because he understood now, it's not always about making ripples. Sometimes it's about learning to be still enough to feel them. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him. Always responsive. Always ready. Always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction. A warning, like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP is. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed. greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly, because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless, but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home.